Hey there, welcome to the deep dive. So glad you could join us.
Great to be here.
Today, we're tackling a really important topic, and well, it's a complex one, the UK's youth justice system.
Definitely complex.
Yeah, we're looking at some material that really unpacks the situation, the young people involved, the policies, and crucially, ideas about how things could maybe be done better.
Hmm.
So our goal here is to kind of sift through that, pull out the really key insights about what's happening with young people in this system, basically get you the main takeaways.
And I'm here to help guide us through what these sources are telling us. It's an area where, honestly, the details really matter.
Absolutely. Okay, let's jump right in then. The material points to, well, a bit of a paradox, doesn't it? Within the system, it's not just about overall crime rates going up or down.
That's right. It's a really mixed picture, almost contradictory when you look at the data provided.
How so?
Well, on one hand, there's a definite positive trend the sources highlight. Fewer young people entering the system for the very first time. A noticeable decline there.
Okay, so fewer first-time entrants.
Yeah, would kind of suggest that maybe some preventative measures are, having some sort of impact, steering kids away early.
That sounds like good news, initially at least. Fewer kids getting into trouble in the first place. So what's the other side of that? The challenge, the paradox?
The really significant challenge, and maybe the most concerning thing in the sources, is that for those who do end up in the system, the reoffending rates are actually going up.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So yeah, less traffic coming through the front door, maybe, but those who are inside seem to be finding it harder to leave for good. They get caught in this cycle.
So it's almost like we're getting better at stopping some kids from entering, but for those who do get involved, we're less effective at actually helping them break that cycle.
That's certainly what the trend seems to suggest based on this material.
That really shifts the perspective, doesn't it? It's not just about entry, but what happens after. So why? Why is this happening? What do the sources say are the root causes behind this reoffending cycle?
Well, the sources are pretty clear. It's not just one thing. It's more like a cluster of interconnected factors. Socioeconomic deprivation really stands out.
Deprivation. How big a factor are we talking?
There's a stark statistic in the material. Children in the most deprived areas are 2.5 times more likely to be exposed to violent crime.
2.5 times. That's huge.
It is. And that kind of environment, that exposure, it significantly increases vulnerability. Yeah, and the likelihood of getting involved in offending.
That really drives home how much environment matters, not just individual choices. It feels like more than just a justice issue, it's societal.
Absolutely. And beyond deprivation, the sources point strongly to the impact of trauma and abuse.
All right, past experiences.
Exactly. These things create complex needs, they impact behavior, decision-making. And then there's the lack of access to basic opportunities like decent education or finding a job.
So without those positive pathways,
It becomes incredibly difficult to build a different future, to leave offending behind. It's like a web past trauma, current disadvantage, few future prospects, all feeding into that risk of reoffending.
it paints a really tough picture. It's rarely just a simple bad choice. And speaking of disadvantage, the sources also flag up disparities within the system itself, right? Is everyone experiencing it the same way?
No, definitely not. That's a critical point the sources raise. The data clearly shows that children from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds are disproportionately represented in the youth justice system.
So significantly more likely to end up in the system compared to their white peers.
That's exactly what the figures indicate. And the material suggests this isn't just random chance. It points towards deeper systemic issues.
Systemic issues within justice and maybe society more broadly.
Yes, issues that need urgent attention if we want genuine fairness for every young person, whatever their background.
That imbalance is really concerning. It makes it even more important to understand how the system is actually supposed to work. What's the official philosophy? Is it about punishment?
The official line, according to the sources, is definitely rehabilitation over punishment for young people.
Rehabilitation first.
Yes. The idea is to understand why they offended, the underlying causes, not just punish the act. It recognizes, the young people are still developing. The goal is intervention for positive change.
Okay, so that's the aim. How does the system try to put that into practice? Who's doing the work on the ground?
Mainly, it's the youth offending teams, though now they're often called youth justice services.
Right, I've heard that change.
Yeah. And they're designed to be multi-agency teams. So you've got people from social work, probation, police, health, education, all supposed to be working together.
The idea being a more rounded, holistic approach.
Exactly. pooling expertise to tackle those complex needs we talked about, the things driving the offending behavior.
Okay, makes sense. So, with that structure and that aim of rehabilitation, how well is it actually working? What do the sources say about effectiveness?
Again, it's that mixed picture we keep seeing. On the plus side, the sources note a significant reduction in the number of young people actually being held in custody.
Fewer kids locked up.
Yes, which aligns with that rehabilitative goal of diverting from custody where possible. That's seen as a positive step.
That feels like progress, but given the reoffending stats, is that the whole story?
It's an important part, but no, not the whole story. Those high reoffending rates we mentioned earlier really suggest something's missing.
Missing after the intervention.
It seems so. While they might avoid custody or spend less time there, the support they get afterwards, well, it isn't consistently leading to lasting change. The material points to challenges transitioning back to the community, tackling those root causes effectively. That failure to break the cycle after intervention is a major concern highlighted.
Right. It's one thing keeping someone out of a cell, but if they end up back in the system later, the job isn't really done. Have there been recent policy shifts trying to address any of this? Maybe linked to custody numbers?
Yes, the sources do mention things like early release schemes being introduced.
Early release. Okay, why?
Partly, it seems, to manage the pressure on capacity within the youth's secure estate, overcrowding issues.
Capacity management.
That kind of policy often sparks debate, though.
Yeah.
What do the sources say about the reaction? Any criticisms?
Yes, the material notes concerns, particularly from law enforcement viewpoints about public safety. The worry being, releasing young people early might pose risks.
Okay, public safety concerns. Anything else?
Just as importantly, the criticism highlighted is the lack of robust support after release. If you let someone out early, but there's no solid plan or help for them to reintegrate successfully, does it really help?
Does it undermine the rehab goal? Potentially, yes. That lack of post-release support is seen as a key factor that could contribute to the reoffending cycle. It's presented as a tricky balancing act for policymakers' capacity versus safety versus effective support. And these criticisms are significant viewpoints within the whole discussion, as reported in the sources.
It's definitely important to hear those different perspectives laid out in the material. It really leads us to think about the rehabilitation efforts themselves. What about the actual programs? Are there any that seem to be working well, showing promise?
The material does point towards community-based programs as being particularly promising.
So working with kids in their own environment.
Exactly. Focusing on things like education, mentorship, mental health support, but delivered right there in the community. The thinking, based on the sources, is that this is often more effective long-term than isolating them somewhere.
Makes sense, keeping those connections. Any specific examples stand out?
Yes. One specific type mentioned is deferred prosecution schemes.
Deferred prosecution. How does that work?
Basically, in some cases, a young person can avoid a formal criminal charge altogether if they agree to participate in and complete certain rehabilitative activities.
So it's a chance to divert them before a record really sticks.
Precisely. The source mentions these often involve tailored programs, maybe education, therapy, skills training decided early on, sometimes even before court. It's an opportunity for intervention, provided they engage.
That sounds really positive, potentially life-changing if it prevents a record, but are these promising programs easy to get off the ground and run effectively? What are the hurdles?
Yeah, the sources are pretty blunt about the obstacles. Funding is a big one.
Yeah.
Always funding.
Always.
These programs need investment, and resources are often tight. Staffing is another major issue. Finding and keeping skilled, committed professionals to run these complex initiatives isn't easy.
Funding and staffing, the usual suspects affecting public services. Anything else?
There's also inconsistency. What's available and how well it works can really vary from place to place depending on the local authority. So you get uneven outcomes.
A postcode lottery almost.
Sort of, yeah. And then there's a big one that's outside the system itself. Stigma.
The stigma of having a record, even a youth one.
Exactly. The sources stress how much this hinders reintegration. Finding housing, getting a job, just being accepted back, it's incredibly hard and actively works against the rehab efforts.
That societal piece feels huge. The system can do its best, but if society pushes back. So how can society, more broadly, help? What do the sources suggest?
They really push for a truly holistic approach. The justice system deals with the behavior right, but long-term success means tackling the root causes.
Which means looking beyond the justice system itself.
Absolutely. Success is linked to wider societal investment.
Investment in what, specifically?
Things like better, accessible education for everyone, proper mental health services that are easy to get to, and community development making neighborhoods safer, more supportive places.
So strengthening the foundations.
Pretty much. Recognizing the justice system isn't isolated. It's part of a bigger picture. And improving that wider environment is key for youth rehabilitation to actually stick.
That makes complete sense. You need the whole ecosystem to be healthier. Okay, so pulling all these insights from the material together, what should policymakers be focusing on? What are the key priorities for improvement?
The sources lay out a few key things.
Hmm.
First, prioritize early intervention.
Mm.
Really build on that success in reducing first-time entrants. Invest before kids get involved in crime.
Get ahead of the problem. Makes sense.
Second, tackle those disparities head-on. Ensure equitable treatment, regardless of background. That means looking critically at how the system operates.
Okay, equity.
Third, properly resource those community-based programs, both
Oh.
funding and staffing. Make sure the good ones are available everywhere, consistently.
Invest in what works and make it widespread.
And finally, the sources emphasize continuous evaluation. Keep checking what works, what doesn't, using data, and be willing to adapt strategies. Don't just stick with something if it's not effective.
So prevent early, ensure fairness, invest in community rehab, and keep learning. That really sums up the action points from the material.
Wow. This has been a really thorough look at such a complex area.
It really has.
We've covered who's in the system, the tricky issues around reoffending, how the system tries to respond with rehabilitation, the successes, the significant challenges, and what the sources suggest is needed next.
And it's clear from the material, isn't it? While there are good intentions and some progress, like fewer kids in custody, those high reoffending rates and the disparities show there's still a long way to go, both for the system and, the wider society supporting these young people.
Yeah, supporting them to build genuinely crime-free lives. And
Mm.
understanding all this is so important for you listening, because this system impacts young lives, families, whole communities. You've given us a much clearer view of that balanced progress made, but substantial work still needed, and the vital role of that holistic support and focused policy.
And it leaves you, our listener, with a really important question to mull over based on everything we've discussed from the sources. Given these mixed results, fewer getting in, but high reoffending and the struggles with resources and stigma, what does success actually look like for a youth justice system aiming for rehabilitation?
That's a big question.
It is, and maybe even more critically, how much of that success depends on things outside the formal justice system itself, like housing, schools, support networks, just community acceptance.
Yeah, things beyond the system's direct control.
Definitely food for thought. Thank you so much for walking us through all this material and sharing your insights.
My pleasure. Always interesting to dive into these sources.
And thank you, as always, for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time. Take care.